What good is the warmth of summer, once asked the American novelist John Steinbeck, without the cold of winter to give it sweetness? Scottish League Championships are so often shaped by the season's toughest spell. In 9 of the 12 seasons during this period, Rangers were significantly stronger over the autumn and winter, and especially the latter. With all seasons being split into 4 quarters and all points adjusted to 3 for a win, the third quarter, covering December to February, derived the most points on average, with 2.3 points per game being won between 86 and 98. With the weather and pitches at their worst, it really is the endurance phase of the season, but with European competition either on pause or a distant memory and the League Cup taken care of, the focus can almost entirely be placed on league business, and this is where Rangers thrived. Given the start to 89-90, the middle 2 quarters of the season needed a massive response, and by December, Souness' side were going into overdrive. At the start of the month, Rangers were in second place, 2 points behind the leaders Aberdeen, but by the 3rd of February they were 7 points clear at the top, as they delivered a level of consistent pressure that the rest of the challengers couldn't deal with. Most notably, it was the key matches against the chasing pack, in which they proved to be unshakable. To discuss the winter of content in 1989-90, I'm joined by Andy McGowan. How are you, Andy? In a new office, I believe, tonight.
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks, Martyn.
And on their special Easter weekend in Greece, how are we, John Cowden?
So, yeah, good to be back again. Another interesting winter. Not winter of discontent, as there rarely were.
No, indeed. Let's start with a signing. And it's something that David and Alan and I discussed briefly last week, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on this as well. We said goodbye to Ray Wilkins in November, late November of 89. Souness, as we talked about last week, had made mention of the fact that Rangers struggled to switch from the physical demands of the Scottish Premier Division to the more technical demands of Europe. It's too big an adjustment. He has experimented, Andy, in the first half of this season with quite a technical midfield. Walters and Stephen are mainstays now. Walters being the out-and-out winger, I guess. Stephen never like that, more of a right-sided midfielder, but both very cultured, both very technical. Wilkins the mainstay of that midfield, which just meant you had either Ian Ferguson or John Brown as a worker around Ray. Rangers were linked with John Collins, but for reasons that we discussed last week, that never came to fruition. However, there were other ball-playing technical midfielders that Souness could have looked at. He didn't. He chose Spackman. No shortage of skill there, but he, by Souness' own admission, was a worker and gave him something that Ray Wilkins didn't. Despite the observations that Souness has made about what Rangers needed to move into that next level, that next development, that next evolution, I think he bottles it here and he goes to what he knows best, what he knows will work in Scotland, and therefore we can never really shake the demands of this weekly grind.
Aye, because, Spackman's a funny player in that you look back and he was actually a really, really good box-to-box midfielder. A really good all-rounder, really adaptable, but you'd probably think him as an industrious midfielder before a technically brilliant midfielder like Wilkins was that went before him. But this is a guy that played in one of the best, or part of the squad in one of the best Liverpool teams ever. My mind was playing tricks me. I thought we signed him from Liverpool, but I've since discovered it was actually Queen's Park Rangers he played for after Liverpool. And my memories of Spackman as a player are all good. And I think when he signed, it was one of those classic Souness signings at that point where he dips into the English market, which he knows so well. And at that point, we've spoken many a time on this pod about the fact that the world was our oyster and the entire English leagues were our buffet. We could go and pick any player we wanted, mostly, and get them. And we just kind of plucked him out of the English leagues there, and he came in, and he was, from day one, he was excellent. And you're right in that he was totally different from Wilkins, and I remember there being some eyebrows raised that it was a bit of a departure, but we soon found that he probably was a better how can I put this? A better fit or balance to the rest of the team over a longer period. You know, you can jump forward to near the end of Spackman's career at Rangers, and he was playing as a centre half, and you would never have known he was a midfielder. So it turns out to be a brilliant signing, but at that point in time, it was just another signing for us. And but we'll speak about his impact, I'm sure.
Yeah, we will. John, I'm not disputing. Let me make this absolutely clear. I love Nigel Spackman, and in looking back, I still have a lot of affection for him. He would be a very good signing for Rangers. One of Souness's typical moves of expediency, really. I need him to fill this particular role. Things are tight in the league. We are not getting through. We're not meeting the physical battles that the lower half of the division are providing us with. So I need someone to come in and give us that reinforcement. It works. We're going to discuss just how it works over the course of this show. But bigger picture, relating to the bigger observations that Souness has made after Munich, clearly what he's tried to do in the first half of that season with a far more ball-playing midfield. Where do you stand on this? Because I think he understands what needs to happen with Rangers at this moment in time, but he doesn't follow through with it, and he reverts to type a wee bit with this signing.
Yes, it's what would you say? In hindsight, you would say, why didn't he do both? He could have signed both. You might see the overdraft and all that, but maybe that's a symptom of the age where, like Thatcher, Souness and Murray had the right idea but didn't actually have the detailed plan to back it up. I mean, Spackman was pretty uninspiring when he came in compared to some of the signings we'd had. It's not derogatory, he turned out magnificent, but he didn't capture imagination. He was seen as a workman-like player, but it's not just Wilkins. I mean, at this point, Durant's been out for a year and no idea when he's coming back. He comes back in the reserve game soon, but we know how long it takes. And Derek Ferguson is on his way out for all sorts of reasons. You know, the shoulder keeps popping out and these disciplinary issues. So we are lacking creativity in the middle of the park, which you need if you're going to go, as we're talking about for the past year since Murray came in, about being part of this whole European thing. You got to have a degree of ambition, and you say, okay, we can have Spackman for beating. I think you've mentioned it already many times in this season about beating teams in the bottom half. But if you're going to unlock the top teams, you need something special. And as I said, it wasn't just Wilkins who's gone. Lost Durant and Derek Ferguson, who could have, in another parallel universe, fitted in, hasn't. So he's leaving himself quite short in the middle of the park in terms of creativity, which isn't an issue in Scottish terms, if that's all you're worried about. But if you're going after Europe and to improve, you need something else. And that doesn't mean you don't sign Spackman. It means you need Spackman plus a creative midfield player.
So that we'll go back to the overdraft issue, which is expanding. And Murray's not overly concerned about it, but it's an issue. Rangers spent the best part of £3 million in the summer. It shouldn't be forgotten. In fact, more than £3 million in the summer. And I mean, we recouped, just over £1 million, £1.5 million. So it's sensible-ish. We spent £500,000 in Nigel Spackman. Again, this is 1990. There's this is still a fair bit of money, John, to be splashing out. Would it have needed then a restructure rather than just expanding this overdraft, which,
yes,
let's be honest, wasn't really feasible to bring in the kind of quality that we're talking about?
Absolutely. You don't buy a house with a credit card. You have to restructure, and I think what probably Murray didn't want to do was give up a degree of control, because anybody putting in that kind of money would have wanted it. But you're looking at the same time, we're talking about expanding the stadium all around this winter, and it's going for planning permission. We're going to take it, and he does find money via the venture schemes and whatever else to do that. So money is accessible. I think the issue is he does not want to give up control of this toy. We just look where it is. I mean, it's not just about buying players. It's, Auchenhowie should have been built around this time instead of Tartan. Internationalists to every cricket ground in the west of Scotland. It's, around now, do we not sell Derek Ferguson for about 700 grand or something to Hearts, or is that much later? I mean, it's 500,000 is nothing at this point. It's something, but it's nothing. You can't do it via the overdraft. As I said, it's like buying a house with a credit card. You have to have long-term finances. But if you're talking about going in and playing with the big boys in Europe and you're expanding your stadium and everything else, then you should be restructuring, which is probably a combination of equity coming in and longer-term debt, which he does come round to, but by then the ship has sailed, and I'm sure we'll come to it in seasons to come. But at this point, this is the moment when if you're going big, and you don't need to risk it because this is late 80s, early 90s UK. There is money around to do these things. We are head and shoulders above everybody else in the UK because we have a stadium fit for purpose. Is there anybody else has this? Because the Taylor report comes out around now as well.
Taylor report will be,
we're
coming
box
soon,
seat. So, that's my view. It's there's no plan. And my only conclusion is that Murray doesn't want to give up control or be held to a degree of corporate governance. And that's not saying he was up to anything, but anybody putting in the kind of money that's required would want checks and balances.
Yeah.
And probably didn't want that.
No, there's no probably about it. So, Andy, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. Just in terms, I've mentioned before that I think this is the juncture here, in theory, where Rangers, it had to be now or never, really, in terms of moving over. Like we've done the hard bit, see the bullying stuff, and see all the disciplinary stuff and all the red cards, and even to a certain degree the best of British policy. That's what was required, and all the bombast we were required to punch back. But now we're kind of kings of the castle. We're going to now strong favourites to retain the title, first time since '76. And as we were going to talk about before, in terms of a competition, it's so cutthroat just behind us that we have some space with which to work. Is that the time where Rangers do restructure differently? Because as we're going to find out when we start to think about different ways of doing it, that as John says, that ship has sailed.
I think the seeds of hubris are being planted here. I don't think they're shown yet, but I think this is the start of it. Because as John's quite rightly said, Murray would be loath to lose that absolute control, because we know that now, because in later years, and this pod will cover that, there's money, significant money comes in from external players like Sir Dave King, Enoch through Joe Lewis, the billionaire that owns Spurs now, and he done that without losing any control. Yeah. He gave away so little of the Rangers cake that it was genius in his part, actually. So at this juncture, he's never ever going to go ball deep with the bank. And to be fair to Souness, his trading was immaculate. We sold Mel Sterling, for Christ's sake, for more than we bought Nigel Spackman for. Yeah. And he had an uncanny knack of doing it, and I've referred to him in the past as being the master of the, he'd have been a fantastic buy-to-let landlord, because he could flip players like pancakes. It was fantastic at it. But the great point there about Auchenhowie, this was the time where we could have made hay while the sun shone, because we were so far ahead in terms of the stadium situation. But all focus was on the playing staff and buying the European Cup. So I understand why it never happened, and I don't know if we as a support would have been as far-sighted enough to say, right, actually this year you're signing nobody, but we spend whatever it would have been then, £5 million on a state-of-the-art training centre. I don't know if we would have swallowed that.
No, I'm not sure we would have either. But that's what good leadership
can
does.
I just say, in terms of the European Cup, though, if I was to put the opposite side, putting out Wilkins and shipping off Ferguson and bringing in Spackman isn't taking you any closer.
No, it's
and
not.
We already know we're coming up short. So if you are going for the European Cup, then actually there is no risk, as we know in this market. You give Souness a bit more, but which again goes out to how do you get external funding to buy 2 or 3 players?
Because this is an issue with respect to Europe, guys.
Yeah.
With respect to the European Cup, and this is why I think the best of British is now done. It's put us on top of the pile, and we're now a feeling that we are now the front runners here. No one knows that 9 in a row is a possibility at this stage, but we're going to be favourites for the title for the foreseeable future, right? And that has come through the Woods and Butcher conveyor belt, the latest of whom is Trevor Stephen and now Nigel Spackman. That is not getting us to European success. What you need is 2, 3, 4 probably performers, genuine European performers that are going to cost a lot more than our overdraft can do, and probably would cost a lot more than any reasonable restructuring could do. And yet again, what is hanging over all of this are the changes to the rules. Because Gary Stevens and Trevor Stephen are probably immovable as first team picks. They are the only 2 what would be classed foreigners until 1991. Butcher wouldn't, Woods wouldn't, Walters wouldn't, because they were here before the summer of 1988 when they were given 3 years grace. So you only have 2 more spaces really. And who are you getting in December, by the way, as well, in terms of genuine continental class? That didn't really happen. Things happened in the summer. Now we're going to talk about Kuznetsov in couple of future episodes, which obviously was kind of tragic, really. But there are limitations as to what I think realistically Rangers can do. Anyway, he makes
Martyn,
sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say the glass ceiling for us, just to give perspective to listeners, was Serie A. That was where we couldn't go as a club. We were the biggest in Britain, but Serie A was just too far out of reach. And that's where all the top class players were.
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
And that's why, I remember my dad used to say to me, we'll know we've arrived when we start signing players for Italy. And we did that later, and we'll talk about Miko and all the rest of it later on. And turns out that it wasn't the panacea we thought it was. But this is where we were at that point. And we were the kings of Britain in transfer terms. But Serie A was where the cream of the crop were, and we couldn't get access to that market. It was too expensive.
And I think that's the key point. I think that is a dreamland. We'll get into all that as we go. Anyway, he does make his decision. He wants what he knows and loves best, and that absolutely is a Nigel Spackman player. Made his debut at Tynecastle on his 29th birthday. Rangers visited a Hearts side that were just 2 points behind in third place. Hearts started well. Eamon Bannon scored, but again, so consistent with this season, Rangers didn't panic. They just consistently and patiently played their way out of trouble. Walters hit the post before half-time, then got a deflected goal that brought the game level, but it was Trevor Stephen from a Mo Johnson assist, reverse roles there, who got Rangers the win. And yep, tight margins, Rangers come through. A similar story, Tannadice in the middle of December. Johnson pounced on a bad Alan Main goalkeeping error to grab a draw in conditions so cold that Ali McCoy was wearing ski gloves in the second half. I don't know if either of you were up at Tannadice that night, can testify to just how cold that was.
Our bus made it through, yeah. But a few didn't get passed off their Arder because of the blizzard. And we had to come back via the Kincardine Bridge. I recall as we came out of the stadium, somebody started singing Little Old Wine Drinker, and everybody was singing about the rain in California. You were soaked through. It was one of those. The game should never have been played, I don't think. Safety of players, safety of your paying punter. But again, Mojo did the business. But it was, you'd have taken a draw because I don't think you could play much football in those conditions. No. But typical Scottish kind of weather. It's not as if it was on the TV or anything. It was just, yeah, we can pretty much play. But it was horrific. I think there was quite a few buses had to turn back at Ochterarder who were about half an hour further back down the road than us.
Well, the Rangers bus made it and they got out with a point, as I said, which brings us up to New Year's Day and Glasgow, City of Culture of 1990. How much culture there was on show at Parkhead is maybe another debate.
Not really much has happened in midfield. It's been more negative than anything else. Paul McStay hasn't got going. Here's Spackman. That's a better ball. Johnston. Here's McCoy. Spackman, he scored. That's a beautiful goal by Rangers. Spackman, Rangers' newest signing in his debut at an Old Firm game, scores the first goal of the match. A beautiful move here. A superb touch inside from Johnson to McCoy's, and that emphatic finish there by Spackman.
Well, Andy, welcome to Nigel Spackman. What a way to announce yourself. As I said, not a game full of sophistication in line with Glasgow's new status. It wasn't a particularly good game, to be honest. Chris Woods made a brilliant save late in the second half from a Paul Elliott header, but it was that 14th minute goal. Well, what? Spackman robbing a kind of dithering Paul McStay. There's a perfect representation, I guess, of what Souness was talking about. You can have all the technique in the world, but if someone smashes into you and steals the ball, it's not really worth much. And a brilliant break, Johnson involved, McCoist involved. The space Spackman has to run into to finish that move off never fails to amaze me, even though I've seen it so often. And yet again, Andy, Rangers just doing the biz. 1-0, another 1-0 against the team in the top half.
On the goal, you'll not see a better counter-attacking goal when Spackman started it and finished it. And, as far as Old debuts go, you can't make much more of an impact than that. And I implore everybody to go and watch that on YouTube if you haven't seen the goal, because it's actually, it's a really aesthetically pleasing goal, because the way he puts it in the back of the net after a fantastic run through the middle of that non-existent Celtic defence. But we've spoken about in previous pods about getting the Parkhead hoodoo done and dusted, and here we were, and this was from memory, this was fairly routine. And you've got a Celtic team there that are, Celtic are starting, as a club, are starting to fray completely, because we're stretching our legs away from them, and as a club they're falling behind, and we're just going forward and forward in every sense. So it was just a stamp of authority on them again at the right time of the season. It kind of epitomised the transfer power. We lose Wilkins, who was a class act. We go out and sign another guy, and immediately he's having an impact against our major rivals in a really crunch game of the season. Far less the fact that it's a New Year's Day game, which obviously has added significance. So fantastic win. I'm trying to think how many Bears would be there, John. About 18,000. Did we get as many as that then?
Yeah,
we wouldn't be far off it.
60,000. Probably 20,000 squeezed in with, shall we say, leftovers or whatever. But we'd get the whole end plus at that point. We'd still get some of the stand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, we're probably talking 18 to 20,000. It's a phenomenal feeling being in there. I mean, this is 3 in a row, unbeaten, 2 wins and a draw.
Yeah.
It's beginning to think, right, we've cracked this now. We've got this lot where we want.
I was going to ask that, John, because
yes.
April '89, the hoodoos lifted. Rangers finally win at Parkhead. We got that draw in August. Should have won, but given the circumstances Rangers were in when they turned up at Parkhead that day, that's a victory of sorts, to be honest. And as you said, here's another one in the bag. And so did it feel like that? So right, that's now, April wasn't a one-off. We have cracked this case here.
Yes, it does. It's one of those things when you get that result, it can either be the freak one, or it just breaks every barrier down, and suddenly you've went through that mental block you had. And it was a mental block because we were miles better than them since Souness came. But his record until that April was, and after that, 1 or 2 games coming up, I mean, it's probably unparalleled if you like, through the 90s, just how easy it is to go there and win. Not always by the odd goal. We give them some hammerings as well. But it just feels at this point where it holds no fears for us. Whereas, even at the beginning of 88, 89, or, 87, 88, there's a trepidation which is based on psychology rather than facts, because we're the better team. That suddenly we think, right, we've got it cracked, you just let this lot run around with the ball, like a headless chicken, and then we'll take it off them and we'll score goals. And that's what we do. The April game was sensational because we absolutely destroyed them in that first 45 minutes. I think that gave everybody confidence, and then them missing the penalty. As you said, the draw in August, September, when we were bottom of the league, hadn't got a point, and we'd come away with it. I think the only downside is, could we score a few more goals at the Rangers end? Yeah. Because everyone, you need those opera glasses to see what's going down that other end.
Well, there'll be plenty of those flying about, of course, with the City Culture year. Andy, you made a point a minute ago just about Wilkins leaving, Spackman coming in and having an impact. How demoralising is that, especially for Celtic, but for others, that Rangers, and you're right about Souness, by the way, a market trader, Thatcher's boy, he just kept doing it right. And if it was not right, they were moved on, and they usually moved on for no less money than they were brought in for. But it just seemed like every major signing that came through the door worked. And Rangers, losing some of Wilkins' quality because he just wanted to be home in London. Oh, that maybe gives us an opportunity. Who did they bring in? Oh, he scored in his Old Firm debut. I mean, this is just incessant.
So I'd love to say it was a scouting network that we had and impeccable, data, but it certainly wasn't that. I'd probably go for the fact that it was purely Souness' knowledge of the market. Aye. And the chances were that if you bought somebody from the top end of England, they were going to be able to do a job in Scotland. Let's be very, very honest about it. I'm trying to think of anybody that kind of didn't do. I mean, we were saying guys like Jimmy Phillips, Neil Woods, Chris Vinicombe, for Christ's sake, he came from the lower leagues and they still came in and showed up, I think only Falco was the only one that really I can think it didn't live up to the pace, because at that point, the common consensus was that Scotland was a faster paced game than England. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But from memory, Falco was the only one I could think it didn't live with the pace. So I think it was a fairly safe transfer strategy we had, in the fact that if you're spending 500k, which was a lot of money back then, you were going to get somebody that could do it in England, could do it in Scotland. I think that was the secret. I don't think there was any more magical transfer genius that we're missing nowadays. And it is quite a stark contrast to what we think of now. I mean, we talk about Ross Wilson and signing strategies and scouting. None of that existed there. It was purely, knowledge of markets from the manager. So it would have been demoralising, because Celtic were scraping about and they were buying players as safely as they could. They bought Tommy Coyne for the Scottish market. They were buying players that should have done the job, but they were nowhere near the same level as the players we were buying, by and large.
So that game on the 2nd of January, Aberdeen come to Ibrox on the 6th of January. I mean, in footballing terms, probably a bigger game because of how the league looks. John, this was a superb game of football, actually. A young Michael Watt in the Aberdeen goal would have a very good day. Probably the best day he had at Ibrox. We will come to that in later shows. It took Rangers a while, but eventually Aberdeen were worn down and Rangers were kind of deserved 2-0 winners. Dundee United will be taken apart 3-1 at the start of February. And starting this period, 2 behind Aberdeen, 2 points for a win, remember. Rangers are now 7 ahead. It's been some winter of incessant consistency, but there's real elements of quality there too.
Yeah. The problem we have, I guess, and again, maybe it's hindsight, is we don't blow many teams away. But we 1-0 against Celtic at Parkhead, we get the goal early. Aberdeen actually is the best we play, but maybe it's because we don't score for a long time and it doesn't feel like it. The game's still alive, and therefore we play. that this team, if you had a criticism about it, and it probably costs us points against others, is they switch off. It's too easy. And to be fair, Aberdeen were talking about transfer markets. Celtic spent a bit of money, but they spent it in Ross, Galloway, Capcoin. Aberdeen weren't bad in that sort of
Heelhouse
Dutch market. Heelhouse and Schnelders before Darkness came or whatever, and Peekaboo. I mean, they were picking up the Van der Ark. They were doing some decent business. But really, it was too easy for us. I mean, Declan I think this is the day they're first in the car park, getting upset at their board, which sets the tone for almost the first half of the 90s. But for us, I guess the reason it looks as if we played so well against Aberdeen is because it took so long to really, make a difference in goals. But usually when we got one goal, we shut up shop. I think when we played the top teams, this 2-0 and this 3-1 against Dundee United, I mean, that was really the show of strength up until then. It was like, we'll get a goal up and that'll do us.
Well, it's a very compact Rangers team, and I keep hammering home this point because I think it's important. Compared to Souness' other seasons, we score fewer goals, but we concede a lot fewer as well. This is just a very well controlled Rangers team. Very Italian. But again, I think what he's looking for is building a team with more control, because you need that in Europe. It can't be all hell for leather, gung-ho, tally-ho, best of British, see you on the other side. It needs a lot more joined up thinking between attack and defence, and a lot more cohesion. And I don't think it's any surprise that you see smaller numbers at either end of the park. Good point though on Aberdeen's business. I think you could possibly say Dundee United weren't bad either. Kind of like some mix with Patalainen and guys like that. There were some European names starting to come in to Scotland that were decent. None of them going to Celtic. Jackanoski by this point not really working at all. So Rangers are very comfortable after a shaky start to the season, let's say. One reason maybe is that the long-term injury thing, which had just been a constant story in this series, guys, not really a factor in this season. The big injuries not really playing a part the way they have. Ian Ferguson would be one maybe to look at. The season limited by illness, really. It's a kind of glandular problem that only improved later in the season when he had his tonsils removed. Souness very supportive of him. He wanted to play Ferguson, despite Ferguson saying, look, I'm a man down after 15 minutes. I am shattered. I can't run anymore. The other one was Richard Gough, with whom he dealt a bit differently, Andy. Gough had a foot problem right from the start of the season. There was always a bit of is he going to play, is he going to be out? Very persistent. Rangers played Arsenal in a friendly kind of Zenith Data Cup. It was basically billed as the best of British Scottish champions against English champions. So friendly, I don't think it was. Arsenal would win. They won 2-1. Souness not impressed. This was just before Christmas. And Souness frustrated Gough, who was in the treatment room. And Gough wrote in his book, he said, look, Souness was never one to make allowances for injury, his own or anyone else's. He just impatience about him when it came to injuries, as if he didn't think your body should let you down. And this is Souness projecting, I guess, himself. Go back to his Liverpool career, Andy. Souness plays easily over 30, probably over 40 games every season. He doesn't break down. He is not an injured player. And he just assumes that everyone else will be that way. So much so that when he went into the treatment room that night, he said to Gough that you're at it. Now that's a big and a bold accusation to make to another professional footballer, basically saying you're cheating me, you're cheating your teammates, you're cheating your club, your employer. Gough felt that night that he was on his way out because, well, what am I supposed to do? I can't fight the manager. I know what happened to Graham Roberts, but I can't play for him because he's called me a cheat. I can't live with that. I think now, Gough said he never spoke to anybody. Walter Smith was in that room as well at the time. Gough assumes that Smith had a word with Souness because he had a festive do not that long after, on behalf of the chairman. And Souness, as he was invited to do, made a toast, really, for the festivities. And he said, I've got to apologise to a certain player because of some very unfair remarks I made to him last night. The player knows what I'm talking about, and I was really out of order with him after the game last night. Now, Gough said, no, I've not spoken to anyone, so no player knew what that was about. So Souness never mentions him by name. He's never apologised directly. Souness would never apologise directly. But that's as much of an apology as you're going to get from Graham Souness, I think. And for Gough, that was it. Done. And they never had a crossword again. There's a bit of a sliding doors moment, Andy, given how Souness normally deals with these kind of things, and he would have been Oscar.
It's a remarkable tale because it says a lot about Gough, first of all, because a lesser man would have carried that as a permanent injury to ego, and maybe say I can't work with that guy regardless of the apology. The context behind it, and this isn't to be condescending, we've obviously got different people listening to this at different age groups, but Souness's era, players played with injury, and that's why so many of that kind of era were basically cripples in their 40s, and things were kind of changing. It's not like nowadays where players are like racehorses and the slightest niggle they'll no play. But that injury that Gough had was a persistent, and everybody used to say to him, hold on, how bad can a toe injury be? What is it, a bunion? But he was getting boots specially made by Adidas to compensate for it. That's the stage it was at. And it was a bit of a mystery injury, and they couldn't get to the bottom of it. But it is remarkable, for what Gough's reaction to it, and the fact that he was able to just say, well, that's the end of it. But the fact that Souness apologised at all, and in such a public fashion, albeit he doesn't name the player, is remarkable, because I think he's probably had a moment of sobriety where he's like, Christ, I've really overstepped the mark there by questioning a player like Richard Gough. And maybe he realised, Gough was too important a player to piss off. This wasn't Graham Roberts, who was ultimately disposable. This was Richard Gough, who he had chased and paid a lot of money to get him over the door at Ibrox, and to burn that for a fucking friendly, against Arsenal. Probably, I think Smith has had a word in his ear. Something's happened anyway to actually realise where he's went with that.
Oh, I think Smith has definitely been involved. This maybe a wee turning point in the Souness story, John, because as I've said before, he is remarkably sanguine, remarkably calm, a dreadful start, the Heel House goal at Aberdeen, beating us up there and shrugging it off, said we're the better team over the course of the season, we'll win the league, don't worry about it. There's no foot through televisions or anything like that. It's such a remarkably calm first half of the season. However, we're now starting to see the Souness that we've known before. That Hearts win in December that I talked about, the 2-1, Mark Walters gets sent off there. Walters has, for understandable reasons, a difficult time at Hearts, I think. Souness is furious about that, furious about the sending off. He is involved in an argument with the referee, but he's also involved in more than an argument. It was alleged with former teammate Dave McPherson. And in the tunnel, Lothian and Borders Police were asked to compile a report by the SFA. This is a Souness who is still currently serving a year's touchline ban following that explosion at Tannadice in the February of '89 about the added on time, John. Now, he could technically defy that ban by naming himself as a substitute, but two substitutes in these days, Souness coming to the end of his career, that wasn't really a luxury that he would entertain. Hearts again, John, that cause or the opponents when more problems arise. This is in the February of 1990, because Souness with his touchline ban is captured on STV, standing inside the tunnel, passing on instructions, trial by television kind of thing, found to be in breach, another £5,000 fine, and a ban increased to 2 years. Very draconian. STV were promptly banned from Ibrox, actually raised in the Houses of Parliament by a Labour MP to complain about the level of competence of the SFA, grossly excessive treatment of Graham Souness based on sleek-it television evidence, and the nature of a penalty shootout to decide the Scottish Cup final when a replay would be better for fans. Any idea what that MP was?
Gorgeous George.
The gorgeous George Galloway, who would have thought it? He is, after a relative lull in hostilities, John, he's back on the warpath with the establishment, and I would suggest this is now a path where there would be no return.
Yeah. But he is at the vanguard, but we have an arrogance about it is where we are taking on all comers. It's around now that Murray says, why are you going to spend public money on Hampden? Ibrox can do the Scottish internationals, and the teddy bears are coming out of the pram from SFA, the Glasgow District Council. It's this hubris.
We're bigger than
we know
Scottish
we're
football.
top of it. We are the only show in town, and everybody, they are falling apart on the other end of the city. Aberdeen and Dundee United have gone back to where they were, still decent, but they cannot compete with this huge. And we have the stadium. Nobody else in Scotland has a stadium. Arguably, nobody else in Britain has a stadium that can do all of this. Everybody else is facing a 10, 15, 20, 30 million bill to build their stadium. And we have it. And we're saying, do you see Murray's comments? Why should the taxpayer fund sports grounds, etc.? You've got Ibrox. Sure, there might be the odd cup final where we're there, but we'll find a way around that. You get Souness fighting it, and he's back. Kind of coincides with Wilkins leaving. I don't know how much he knew of Wilkins leaving, and whether it was one of those he knew what he was doing. He had Wilkins, he had all the pieces of jigsaw was there. And then somebody's taking one of the main bits out, and he's furious. In a subconscious level. I don't know, but the timing of it all seems to coincide around that winter period when actually having, beaten rapid succession, Celtic, all of them, Hearts, Celtic, Aberdeen, Dundee United, 7 points clear. You'd have thought the pressure would be off. Why
but
get
is
upset?
is this then, if we're going to play pop psychology, and why wouldn't we? Because it's a lot of fun. He has tried to be something different. The results have been mixed. He knows the path he should be going down, but it's not providing immediate response. Basically, Rangers are a bit of a hole. We're 2 points behind Aberdeen. We're involved in a championship struggle, and the winter's coming up. It's time to dig. It's time to get tough again. Tough on the park, tough off the park. I'll set the tone, and we're just going to go in body teams again, and really, really. You want to fight again? Right, cool. We'll fight you. We'll fight you on all sides because we're Rangers. And maybe that's the example, because that's how he's approached games. There's a definite change post Wilkins about how Rangers are on the park, and the results are immediately good.
Yeah, but it's a lack of patience, isn't it?
It's impetuous. It's just this impetuosity. Sorry, it's just this guy who wants control, but no one can ever be in control. If the results were good immediately, and as I said, early February, Rangers have this big gap of 7 points. Maybe when Souness is railing and again causing scenes and noise and trouble, perhaps it starts to have a negative impact on results, or it's perhaps because Rangers were just too comfortable. Players admitted as much. That game against Dundee United, they put 7 clear, was the 3rd of February. Rangers would draw 4 league games in a row and then lose to Hibs at Ibrox 1-0. Andy Gorham, a young Andy Gorham, in sensational form for Hibs that day. That's an incredibly bad run of form. That is not championship winning form. That's the kind of stuff that Twitter would be on fire for now. Rangers 7 points clear at the start of that run. They would be 5 points clear at the end of that run. It didn't matter because the competitive nature of everything that was just beneath Rangers meant that no one could break away. But it is an interesting spell where the minds just drifted a wee bit, and the results didn't happen. In the middle of that spell, Andy, outside of the league, was of course the Scottish Cup, 4th round, I guess it would be, 25th of Feb at Parkhead, a 1-0 defeat. again, a pretty poor game. This curse in the Scottish Cup that Souness has seems to be continuing. A terrible goal. Tommy Coyne kind of scrambled it in just before half time. Rangers kind of lacked energy, especially in Ferguson again. Terry Butcher summoned enough energy right enough to test the hinges in the Parkhead door live on STV as Billy McNeill was being interviewed post-match, but maybe that aggression would have been better served stopping Joe Miller's low cross that Coyne bundled into the net before John Brown kicked him back into the net. Again, just another example of this kind of growing frustration. It is an odd little gap in the season, Andy. I do wonder how it would be taken now.
It kept Celtic delusional, if we're being honest, because it was a bad day at the office for Rangers, a very good day at the office for Celtic, and a quite ferocious Parkhead, as I recall. And we just had an off day, and I don't know if none of the day was Scottish Cup hoodies. It was just one of the days where we were poor, and they were well up for it, and they got the goal, and we never really got to go out of first gear. As frustrating as it was at the time, and it was a sore one to take, because we were feeling that we should be winning everything. I remember, I wasn't there, I watched it on TV, but I remember the incident with the door nearly came off its hinges with Butcher, and Billy McNeill caking his pants when it happened live on the telly. And I remember thinking, we're going to be all right, because you can't have that level of bad losers in a dressing room for it not to come back and bite. So it was really frustrating that the Scottish Cup thing was a thorn on our side, to be honest. But as long as we were winning leagues, we kind of lived with it. You're making a good point there. How would it be reacted to nowadays? It'd be pandemonium, hysteria, because it would have been seen as a bite for a midget. A team that shouldn't be living with us in any format just put us out the cup. It was as simple as that. Bad day at the office. That is how I look back on it. I don't know if you guys would disagree.
John, that spell, 10th of Feb to 24th of March, 4 draws and a defeat from 5 league games, out the cup to Celtic. Your memories of how the Bears were taking that. Again, I go back to probably the most important fact, which was 7-point lead at the start of that run, a 5-point lead at the end, only the loss of 2 points.
That was the problem. If we had drawn the first couple and somebody had won a couple and got close, probably we'd have still been in the cup and we'd have won the rest of the games. It was far too easy. It was complacency. The league was done. In fact, the season was done as soon as we went out the cup. I don't think it was a bad day at the office. I think we'd mentally switched off after we'd hammered, as I said, particularly Aberdeen and Dundee United in swift succession and pretty comprehensively. And I think
players admit that
were on, the cigars were on, and that's what it is. In terms of how we react now, actually go back to 55, get put out the cup against St Mirren, the League Cup, get put out by St Johnstone in the Scottish Cup. There is a reaction, but even more so than back then, you're going to win the league probably 4 out of the next 5 seasons without even trying, because there might be one season where the wheels come off. And when you're coming from not having won back-to-back titles since 74, 75, 75, 76, and now you're comfortably cruising along, there's no pressure from the fan. There's less pressure. The Monday morning is horrific. The Sunday night, I think it was a Sunday game.
It was a Sunday
going
game.
Away from it, you're gutted. You've lost to this pub team. It's another Diddy team in the Scottish Cup. And they were a Diddy team. I mean, you look at who they've got, it's just, and they get worse. But I think it's all down to, I don't think there'd be much of a reaction, because when you're so far ahead after years of being so far behind, and you're winning a league and you've got all these great players, you do forgive and you turn a blind eye to a lot, but the players chucked it psychologically. It's one of those things when it's too easy. I've seen it so many times. So the previous season, actually, when we won the league and then we get beat by Aberdeen at Ibrox 3-0 and then we couldn't get up for the cup. There needs to be a pressure to keep you going through the whole season. If it becomes too easy, it's pretty difficult to win the Scottish Cup or whatever. There has to be a real drive to get you through. If you've won the league this was won by February, players switch off. They're human. This is too easy. Yeah. We can turn up whenever we want. And that's what catches them all season, actually, after that first little bit. They're too casual. Well, we'll do that. I mean, Davy Dodds is scoring loads of goals for us at this point. I mean, it's one of us three could have played up front and probably finished about third or fourth top goal scorer.
Yeah.
It really is too easy because we're miles ahead, and that's where, go back to Souness and his vision of how it played. If he could have taken a step back, or somebody had said to him and said, look, you've got 3 years here. There might be the odd blip, but just build a team and let's try and get youth and let's see where we are in 3 years, because there's nothing on the horizon going to challenge us over the long term.
Interesting to go back, look at the fanzines and the reaction around this period of time, because it's interesting because of just, it's a terrible run. And there's, of course, more than a few moans, but the takeaway is that, well, a wee bit like the cup final last year, as frustrating as it is, it's the odd result, and it might just keep them in a kind of state of denial a wee bit. Jack McGinn, Celtic chairman, who was starting to become under a bit of pressure about the way that Celtic were run, their model of ownership and stewardship. He was quite bullish after that cup win. He said, "It strikes me an awful lot of people have forgotten that with the same structure of company, the club won 4 Premier League championships and 4 Scottish Cups during the 1980s. So we can't be making mistakes year in, year out." They would, of course, lose in the final of that Scottish Cup to Aberdeen on penalties after a 0-0 draw. Utterly drab game. They're not going to win another thing until 1995. And, there's probably something in that, the odd thing just to say, right, we're not dreadful. Things will turn around. There's no need to try and follow Rangers' model of maybe a more dynamic single ownership board, which actually suits us perfectly well.
I think the fanzine is the closest thing you're getting to this period of time is a collective consensus or centre of influence, So we talk about Twitter nowadays and how opinions can be formed and influenced in seconds, but back then, as underground as it was, follow was starting to mould thinking. It was certainly moulding my thinking because I was a voracious consumer of follow, and I think the other side of the city had their kind of counterpart. It was not the View, not Celtic View, was the same. But I think, Matt McGloin. I think McGinn was. I don't think that's what Celtic fans were thinking. That was him defending his position. Oh, Celtic fans were quite, they knew that they had to change with the times. This was the last kind of vestiges of the hierarchy at Celtic clinging on to power and trying to justify themselves. But the fanzine, the follow, and whoever wrote in there were very perceptive because there's no maybe about it. They were right. That was probably a price worth paying for allowing them to stay in the status that they were, because, as you say, they won nothing to 95. And it just gave us more or less a clear run at title after title. So, with hindsight, would that change that result? I don't know.
No,
would the Scottish Cup make the next 5-6 years of Celtic trophy drought worth it?
Well, it's a Jeremy. I think I said this at the end of the last season, the episode 4 of the previous season. McNee wrote a piece in the Express before that Old Firm Cup final saying, it might not be the worst thing for Celtic to see Rangers win a treble and be sick at it, but then demand change, because this is papering over the cracks if they win it.
Yeah.
And it's just yet another one. They would get another one, of course, the following year we'll come to. Yeah, John, it's either willful denial or genuine denial, doesn't matter which, it's still denial, that, well, we've won the one-off game again, things will be rosy in paradise. The same kind of thing. Why don't we have a stadium like Ibrox? The fans don't want that. They want this ramshackle dump because it's got some kind of earthy romanticism?
Yeah, I would go back and win that game, because I don't think that board would have left any quicker, because they were not giving up anything. I mean, they had protests, they had fans coming in late, fans not turning up at all. They were on another planet. I think there was a nice narrative of this keeps them delusional. The more rational, which you pick your percent of their support, weren't bought off by the thing, and the more irrational, well, yeah, they were just nuts. But they're in a mess. I mean, and they would come out. Don't know how it was this season, because their final 8 games this season, they don't in the league. They don't win any. Yeah. It's four draws, 4 losses. But does Jack McGinn not come out the following season and said if the league had started at Christmas, we'd have won it or something? I mean, they've always got this grasp of if you exclude all the games we lost, we would be top of the league.
It's unfair, isn't it, that we do include the games they lose?
Yeah, and it's all of this kind of, and I think there was hubris from all of it. I mean, it was glorious times. The biggest issue that Rangers fans had, as I recall, in February 1990 in Glasgow, was bankruptcy, because the pubs get late licences for the City of Culture, and instead of going straight out after work, which they did for all of January, and wondered why they had no money left by the 3rd week, they then had to start going out. That was the biggest concern, because there was no issues at all in terms of what was going to happen on the pitch. I mean, even if they'd have changed that, they were 3 years away from building a stadium. Is any English player going to come up of quality? They walk into Ibrox, a marble staircase, Souness, and then they go across the city, and we might be going to cricket grounds. They're going to Barrafield, where there's probably needles and all sorts. They're so far behind at this point, and this board is not for going anywhere. Because one of them is that Tom Grant's a stadium director, and he's talking about how much they've spent in the stadium. They really, I don't even think it's denial. I think they would have passed a lie detector test.
Yeah.
I think they actually believe that they're doing a good job. This is what it is. And it's those pesky Protestants again. They'll get their comeuppance. You might argue 20 years later we did. But actually it wasn't on the basis of what was happening around now, whereby we could service our debt. I don't think we were actually making much losses, if any.
No,
the finances weren't an issue. It was only later all that kicked in. We were in a perfect situation, and it's also where you come from. My generation, you guys coming up less so, but all of us who'd experienced the pain, probably your father, Mark, the both of you, who'd been in the 60s and then 70s and the 80s, and suddenly we're the king of the hill. And this is like going back to when Baxter must have been playing. We're thinking, you're turning up, you're going to beat them, you're going to win the title. There's going to be the odd blip, because this is a time when teams would draw 4, 5, 6 games and lose 4, 5, 6 games, and you'd still be there or thereabouts in the league. It's not, you can't afford to drop any points.
Yeah.
Points were dropped all over by everybody, against everybody. It was glorious. It was absolutely glorious.
The feeling that we're an establishment club again, or an establishment club on top, probably underlined, Andy. We talked about the Scottish Cup there. Before the Scottish Cup quarterfinals, before the Scottish Cup 4th round was even played, the draw for the Scottish Cup quarterfinals was made, and it was made at Ibrox, and it was made by the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, who was invited in to do that. Very odd, because we worked with her diary, not the other way about. And a very interesting moment. She waxed lyrical about the stadium. Of course, this was not long after the Taylor report had published its initial findings, and Ibrox was held up as the future. Rangers were held up as the future of British football. Souness, who doesn't often look comfortable second best. You see him in pictures all the time with fans or whatever else, or peers, and he dominates the shot. He seemed quite happy to be second best to the Prime Minister. I think Murray was beaming. Not everyone was. You see the squad picture in the just down at the marble staircase. Stuart Monroe deliberately looking the other way. He thought this was an absolute disgrace. That she was there. Mark Walters wasn't happy at all. Terry Butcher was. Just very telling of the tensions within the country at the time, tensions within that dressing room. But here's the boss of the nation, living it up in the Blue Room and the stadium itself. I think it speaks a lot that those pictures in that particular moment.
It's a remarkable event in the Rangers' history, because we've spoke many a time, referred to the fact that Souness was the embodiment of Thatcherism through that time, whether you want to call him a yuppie or a young entrepreneur. Murray was the exact same kind of mould, and it was really no secret that's what it was. He kind of alluded to it many a time, but the fact that she was embraced so warmly into Ibrox was, for such a divisive figure in Scotland at that point. And let's face it, we're all true blues, but that didn't always extend to that, because we had a very but at that time we definitely had a very working class support and fan base. And I know my dad was no fan of Thatcher.
Well, just for context, the year or 2 years before Scottish Cup final 1988, she was asked to be the guest of honour to present the cup, and usually the guest of honour goes out to meet the teams on the pitch. This was Celtic against Dundee United. They couldn't do it. The Daily Record had published a show the red card to Thatcher, just a red card to cut out and bring to the game. Basically, she had to meet players in the bowels of the main stand. Some Celtic players met her in an old pool room. It was, that's how toxic she was. Yeah. And listen, the majority of the Rangers dressing room didn't want her there. So, and probably the majority of the support, again, go and follow. Read the fans at the time. Absolute fury. That this woman represents what Souness and Murray represent. Is ruining Rangers. It's not the same club anymore, etc., etc. But that energy, ambition, the practices that the Souness revolution put into place were all hers, really, or all of that kind of school of thought. And there are still many Rangers fans to this day, and it amuses me, who profess a hatred of Thatcher and a love for Souness and haven't quite joined the dots as to why that doesn't quite work out, or speak so bleakly about Britain in the 1980s, but so warmly about this Rangers period of dominance, and haven't quite joined the dots as to how the two are related, and there's a bit of cognitive dissonance there. But it was quite the symbolic moment about where Rangers were and where Celtic was in the past. Their stadium, their outlook represented that. Where Rangers were going was very much the future, gentlemen. They were in talks with UEFA, the talks with other clubs about breaking away, at the forefront of all that. But that would be in a few more years to come. In the meantime, Rangers had a title to secure. We'll get to that next week. McCoist and Johnson have to come to the fore because Celtic are coming to Ibrox, and after 5 or 6 games without a win, it was probably time to put that right. Although if you wanted to see it, you would need a dish on your house. Talk about the future. Thank you, Andy.
My pleasure as always.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
And until next week, bye for now.